confirmation in the last 24 hours from government. The cash benefit voucher from the Social Security Agency, SASSA, has now been increased for victims of the flooding. Normally a food voucher in these circumstances is 700 rand. It's now being increased to 1,200 rand. SASSA says it's issued nearly R500,000 worth of these vouchers at this stage. Isobel Frye is the Executive Director of the Social Policy Initiative. She joins us now. Isobel, good morning to you. Is this an appropriate response from government during a disaster to give people some money to help them, well, feed themselves and their families, but also to rebuild their lives?
Morning, Stephen. And firstly, I'd just like to express my deep sympathies to the victim people who have been affected by the storms in KZN and other places in the country. I think at this point in time, it's really difficult to say what is appropriate and what is not appropriate. I think what we can say is sufficient, and are we doing enough to prevent this kind of tragedy from affecting us in the same way that it does in future times? Because I think, Stephen, that what we can accept is that we are in the grip of a changing climate. We know that globally there is we've been experiencing this kind of unforeseen intemperate weather. Are we preventing, are we skilling ourselves, and are we doing enough to prevent this from happening? So in short, to answer your question, the devastation of having everything taken away from you is profound. I think that on a day-to-day basis, government needs to be listening to people, to seeing what their needs are and how it can affect and what it should be doing. I know that Home Affairs should probably be in the area issuing ID documents and the kind of things that people need to just start those small building blocks. The kinds of food parcels that are required. I don't think that we've seen any indication of a really comprehensive plan for rebuilding right now. I hope that people are getting what they need for their day-to-day recovery. And I think also, Stephen, this is a time when non-state actors also need to come to the party. I've been aware of a number of people calling for clothes donations and things like that, businesses. It's shocking, and where you begin is really difficult. But I would like to talk to some extent about the kinds of interventions that we need to be taking to mitigate future that are caused by climate.
Isobel, I don't know if we're losing you on that feed to you at the moment. The thing about climate change and what's very complicated, and one of the issues I think has got to be very difficult, is where people live. And what we're seeing in KZN is so many people live on hills because there's nowhere else. Now, from time to time, government will try and remove shacks from certain areas in eThekwini. There will be a court argument. There will be a big fight about it. People, of course, have built their shacks there because they're close to jobs. It's a very difficult situation to manage. You've got people who've built their communities, their lives, in certain areas where they really shouldn't be, and yet they will resist. I understand why. They will resist any bid to move them.
Stephen, you're right. And I mean, we've seen that up here in Gauteng with shacks on the Yokske River and how annually there are tragedies as the river. What we haven't seen, I think, is a kind of national response that says these are the areas that are vulnerable. These are the people that are vulnerable. And these are the plans to locate communities. We need to be looking at materials. We need to be looking at transport hubs. And we need to be looking at sources of jobs. Now, we haven't seen that. We know, for instance, that Mpumalanga is going to be severely affected by lack of jobs as the coal mines close, as South Africa rises to meet our fossil fuel commitments. So what I'm calling on really is for our awareness about the fact that this is a tragedy. It's another reminder of the fact that we're extremely vulnerable. We need to be coming together as a country and say, these are the costs that are going to happen. Who's going to shoulder those costs and where? Where is business coming in? Where are, as I said, non-state actors coming on? Where are provincial actors coming in and local government actors? And people need to be assured that they will be better off if they are able to come together with the planning and with the shifting of communities, because it's a huge fear factor if you don't know what the future holds, if you don't know what your community is going to be facing if you are located. South Africa has a huge history of forced relocations where people are always worse off. To say that this is an opportunity for us to move forward in a much more coherent way might sound a little unable to deal with the tragedy where we are right now. But this, I think, we need to see it as a way to come on board with the recommendations used by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change.
There's another issue around our society, and I mean, we started this conversation talking about social grants, but what would be much better, obviously, is to better empower our people and to create an empowering environment in which there are simply more jobs. You mentioned jobs in Mpumalanga, but if people have their own incomes, they will build better homes. They will build better homes in better places. How should our society go about doing that, to make our people in a position in which they can get richer?
Again, Stephen, I think you and I have had conversations before. We've had conversations about cash transfers and the basic income grant. The point of departure that we should move from, I think, is recognizing that our government is in a position that no other government in the world has ever been. We have the levels of unemployment that no other country has faced. We are the most unequal country in the world. This is not a question of just adopting a blueprint that has worked in other countries, going for orthodox policies. So we really need to collectively wake up to the fact that as time progresses, and if we don't take those structural changes in terms of policies, we're going to be reaching ever more crisis situations with less and less ability to rebuild in a constructive way. So as you said, how do we ensure that people become agents of their own livelihoods? Our research institute has said for the longest time that a redistribution of sufficient income to enable people to be active consumers and producers really is the most efficient way of going about in a situation where, for the youth, for instance, we're looking at 77% unemployment. Mpumalanga, we're looking at 53% unemployment. We can't go for piecemeal situations, and we need to be looking at policies where empirical evidence tells us what we should be doing. I was looking recently, for instance, at the youth wage subsidy, which is a policy that suggests that policymakers wanted the policy to work, but all the data says that it's not working. The time has come where we have to put aside the niceties that we want. We need to be looking at the entire need of the country, and we need to be adopt policies that perhaps have not been adopted anywhere else, because nowhere else has the level of crisis that we're in. So we are an upper middle income country. We have wealth coming from commodities. How can we take that income? How can we redistribute in a much more equal fashion so that communities are sustainable, so that there is some kind of hope that can be built, but also there is a vast amount of resource coming online because of the climate change. So are there ways in which we can start rebuilding communities using smarter materials, which provide better homes, using technology in a way that enables everybody to be linked up, that enables us to actually look at the kinds of value chains for food supply, so that we don't have food traveling all over the country? How can we look at electrification of our trains so that both goods and people can be transported in a better way? This is an opportunity for us to say we're starting almost from ground zero. We need to be building with our eyes to the future. I mean, in terms of the future policy trend, 2030 to 2050 is the near to medium. Post-2050 is the longer term. We cannot be looking at mopping up opportunities, because that's really what we're doing. We are existing on a day-to-day basis, and we're trying to mop up because we are too timid to really take the kinds of bold policies and to look at the redistribution of the cost of mitigation and adaptation, because it can't be the poor who always carry the burden.
Isobel,
how is it?
I'm sorry, we'll have to leave it there. Isobel Frye, thank you, Executive Director of the Social Policy Initiative. I really appreciate the time. Time now for your headlines.